Good late morning, everyone. I'm Leo Cosentini with Municipal Stormwater Unit. Shortly after the trash provisions became effective, I was selected as a staff person to sort of lead the way to implement these trash provisions. So though I knew nothing about trash before, I've become somewhat now. Putting this thing together, I realized that I haven't given a presentation for over a year and a half, and so my apologies if I'm a little rusty doing this. But well, maybe this will be the worst of the series, and we'll find out. My understanding from the facilitators are we have a group with mixed experience as far as the trash provisions. Some of you may know very little about them. Some of you may know enough to be dangerous, and others may know a lot. So I've tried to find a middle ground where I won't bore the people that know a lot, but at the same time I won't overwhelm people that aren't that familiar. So the trash provisions were became effective December 2nd, 2015. But I think it's important to understand that there was a lot of background a lot of things were happening with trash in California before these trash provisions. And in fact, the trash provisions are more or less a result of these early actions. First of all, we have this pretty picture that I forgot. It's been so long. I forgot where we found it, but it really comes across well as far as educating the public about how. So this is a picture that we found a long time ago. We have it on our website. We think very educational for people. It's an easy way for people to see how trash that's discarded on land and enters our water. It goes without saying. You can see for yourself. I don't have to explain it exactly. Studies confirm that trash discarded on land is the primary source of trash in our water bodies, and trash can include old tires and old beat up shopping carts, but they don't really move based on rainstorms or such. But trash generally, what we were looking at are cigarette butts, paper, fast food containers, plastic cans. That's the type of stuff that generally gets thrown away by the public on land that can get into the storm drains. Trash is a significant pollutant of California waters, and it has been for quite a while. It affects vegetation growth, it impacts spawning areas and habitats for aquatic life. It harms freshwater fish, just like it does fish in the oceans. Let's see, next slide. I have to go 2 things here. All right. The effort in California to control trash started our Los Angeles Regional Quality Control Board. There's a EPA process of that when a water body is impaired, there's an effort that has to be made, and it's quite lengthy and resource intensive, but it's called a total maximum daily load. They had 2 areas, the Bologna Creek and Los Angeles River, that were highly impacted with trash. A lot of us probably have seen pictures of that. There was no beneficial uses. There was no swimming, no fishing. Nothing existed. Nothing was alive really in these areas. Now, development of a total maximum daily load, and that's the reason why it's lengthy in resource. So the regional board has to figure out what are the sources of the pollutants, and what was the sources of the trash, who's doing it, what cities are doing it, where's it coming from, how much is it, how much trash is it, and then the second thing is figure out what's the amount of trash that could be allowed in, and then restore the beneficial uses. And then the third thing, which is maybe the most important thing, is that there has to be an implementation plan. And what developed then, and this is a long time, I wasn't involved with the program, and most of the staff at that regional board who were involved are no longer there. But there was a long process of figuring out, well, how are we going to implement control measures? What would be reasonable? And without getting into the weeds, but it was determined that if trash was captured that's 5 millimeters or greater from the peak flow generated from a 1 year, 1 hour storm event within that urbanized watershed, that would control the trash to a point to restore the beneficial uses of the Los Angeles River and the Bologna Creek. And so they also included basically a baseline trash volume that had to be reduced over time. It was almost simultaneous, but a little after the Los Angeles Regional Board did their TMDL, the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board was collecting data on various known trash impairments within the San Francisco Bay Area. The first part of developing a TMDL is what's called identifying an impaired water body and putting on what's called a Clean Water Act Section 303D list. And I don't want to get too jargonish here, but that's the sort of a first step. The next step would be doing the TMDL. What they decided to do was to take a different approach. Rather than going through the labor-intensive TMDL process, they decided to do an area-wide control trash through their regional municipal stormwater permit, which basically all 70 cities in the San Francisco Bay Area are under the single permit. They borrowed a lot of what the LA Regional Board did. They had interim targets. They had the 5 millimeters or more standard for trash, and they had it from a peak flow generated by a 1 year, 1 hour storm. But what they did is they did a trash assessment and basically identified what areas had little or no trash generation, what areas had a moderate amount of trash generation, and what areas had a high or very high trash generation. And it was only the areas that had moderate, high, or very high did they require that full capture devices would be installed in the inlets to trap the trash and keep that trash from getting into the water body. So the San Francisco Bay Regional Board permit had these targets. There was an example in the upper left corner of mapping, by the way. But they had targets of 40% reduction by 2014, and skipping through, by 2022, the goal would be 100% reduction or a no adverse impact, which is a different way of sort of judging if a stream is fairly clear and all the beneficial uses are restored, that a finding can be made like that. The permit, unlike the Los Angeles Regional Board permit, it had some credits. If a city, for instance, would have a plastic bag ban or a food foam wear ban, they can get credits. I was offsetting credits for that. The permit required some minimum creek and shoreline cleanups. It was sort of based on the population of a city. That was for no further credit, but it also offers some additional credits for additional creek shoreline cleanups as well as homeless encampment cleanup. But again, I believe it's only 10%. It's very little. They want to keep a viable program going and not just do homeless cleanup site cleanups. So let's see, next one here. So that leads up to the statewide trash provisions. So in around 2013, based with all the information from our Los Angeles Regional Board and San Francisco Bay Regional Board. The state board had managed or told staff to develop a statewide program that would be applicable to all surface waters, including the ocean, and it would replace the need for regional boards to adopt future trash TMDLs, and it would provide statewide consistency rather than just have these donut holes, LA here or something there. The whole state would do it. We ended up borrowing the same standards as the LA Regional Board and San Francisco Bay Regional Board, which was trapping trash greater than 5 millimeters from a peak flow generated from a 1 hour storm event from prior. But what's different is that this program, they wanted to offer a little more flexibility, and they didn't want to. They understood through the process, permit adoption process, that they would need to limit this somewhat and not capture the entire cities, but really focus on areas that were shown through studies that generate the most trash, which are called priority land uses. And we'll talk about that, what those are a little later. And then ultimately the trash provisions created a full captured trash system certification process, and the trash provisions require that only certified full capture trash systems be used. And those are a later slide. We'll talk a little bit more about that. In order to provide some flexibility, the state board wants to maximize the use of full capture devices, because that's was thought to be the more absolute way of trapping trash from getting in, from discharging into waters of the state. However, they wanted to be flexible, and they understood that in some cases that may not be reasonable, that may be too expensive. So they have what's called 2 compliance tracks offered. One track is called Track 1, and that's what it's called in the trash provisions, and that's 100% full capture. So at all these priority land uses, which again I'll tell you what those are later, if you put in 100%, install 100% full capture systems for those priority land uses, it is assumed that you are in compliance with the trash provisions. That's the benefit of it, is that if you put that in, you don't have to prove beyond that you're in compliance. But to be flexible, they offer what's called Track 2, which is considered full capture equivalence, and that's a case where a municipality can, instead of doing only priority land use areas, they can select the areas of their city that generate substantial trash. That's number one. And number two, they don't have to put in 100% full capture devices. They could use a combination. They can, at some places they can pull full capture devices. At other places they can do other best management practices. They could increase their street sweeping or initiate street sweeping. They can enforce their ordinances better. There's a whole potpourri of different things cities can do to try to either prevent trash from being discarded in the first place, or to subsequently clean it up before it can get into the storm drain. Now, that's more complicated, because then they do have to demonstrate that it's equivalent to the same amount of trash that would have been trapped if 100% of the priority land uses had full capture devices. And so it was sort of thought that we'll provide the flexibility, but it's going to be a lot more complicated to demonstrate compliance, versus if you just put 100% in, you get this assumed compliance. This is maybe I should have taken it. This is just in a schematic way of showing what I just said. There's the two tracks and how it follows, but it doesn't have any more information that I think I've already told you. So we'll move on. Okay. Okay, so the trash provisions included very date-specific requirements in there as far as when we have to initiate the planning of complying with them. It required us and the regional boards to issue what's called Water Code Section 13383 orders to the municipal permittees. And by June of 2017, which we did. And these letters required the municipalities by September of 2017. So we only gave them 3 months to select one of those tracks that I just discussed and to submit a preliminary jurisdictional map. This would be a map showing their storm drain system and where the priority land uses are and where the inlets are. But it was preliminary. So in 3 months, it was just based on their existing knowledge. So it didn't necessarily have to be that accurate because it gave them till December 2018 to submit a final jurisdictional map. And that one was supposed to be pretty much accurate, like identifying exactly where the priority land uses are, where the water drains in, and so on. It also required that if track 2 was selected, a so-called implementation plan would have to be included. And it's a little bit misnamed because implementation, I think to most people, makes it sound like, okay, I'm going to install this on this date. And it literally wasn't that. It was, since they're in track 2 and they're going to be not using full capture devices at all locations, they're going to be substituting other type of things that they think are equivalent. They would need to prove or demonstrate why they believe the things that they're going to do would be equivalent to it. And so that was required by December 2018. And we were happy that not everyone met the deadlines exactly, but at least to date, we have 98% of them have complied with those orders. The ones that didn't have received enforcement orders, and to my knowledge, most of them are already in compliance now. So now, what are priority land uses? I promised to discuss. Well, the trash provisions, they basically list these. They're high density residential areas of 10 dwelling units per acre. So, if you think of condos and apartments and that type of thing. Industrial land uses is where products are manufactured. There's storage, distribution, warehouses, equipment, storage lots, junkyards, wholesale businesses, distribution centers, building material sales yards. Those are examples of industrial land uses. Commercial land uses, or basically it could be anything from businesses, professional buildings, shops, restaurants, theaters, vehicle park repair shops. Then there's mixed urban, which are just land uses with high density residential, industrial, or commercial land uses intermixed. It also includes public transportation stations, which are facilities or sites where public transit agencies' vehicles load or unload passengers or goods. In other words, bus stops. And then this gets into the weeds, but there's equivalent alternative land uses, and that's simply a little process that even if you're in track 1, if you ask the regional board or the state board to approve a plan to substitute some priority land uses for some other areas that have substantial trash. That can be done. The purpose of that would be if you had priorities, you identified some priority land uses that had really no trash. They were clean. It doesn't make sense to spend a lot of money putting in a full capture device and then maintaining it. It'd make more sense to pick a place that had trash to put that full capture device in. So that was sort of the purpose behind having that system in place. I have no knowledge that anyone actually has taken advantage of it. I could be wrong, but we certainly haven't had any requests at the state board for that. Now, the trash provisions require that full capture devices must be certified, and it gives the authority to have a certification program. It gives that authority to the State Water Board Executive Director. And there were you may have heard about lists that the San Francisco Bay Regional Board had, or the Los Angeles Regional Board had, and they did have some lists, but the trash provisions specifically eliminate those. There's only a state board device list, but the provisions did say that we had to place on the statewide list any device that was on the Los Angeles or San Francisco Bay Regional Board list, which we did. We call those grandfathered full capture devices. So though we have little detail about them, the trash provisions grandfathered them in. There are currently about 20. There were more on those lists, but some of them were no longer being manufactured, so we took those off. Those manufacturers are free to come back in and ask to be put back on, but they no longer exist. So there's 20 grandfathered. There's also these multi-benefit full capture devices. And what they are, the trash provisions required the state board staff to work with the California Stormwater Quality Association, which maintains a BMP handbook. These are typical type of best management practices that municipalities implement generally to comply with hydro modification requirements. But we were supposed to look at any of those that would meet the definition of full capture and then add them to our certified list and call them systems. We had meetings with NGOs and with contractors and people who are familiar with the subject. And it was decided that there were 5 that, if properly designed, meet the definition of full capture. And those would be media filters, infiltration trenches, detention basins, capture and reuse systems, and bioretention. And so we have 5 of those that are also considered full certified full capture systems. And then since the time we put together an application for anybody who wanted to get a new certified system, and we have, since that time, we've already certified 30 new devices. Basically, the process is that the application is submitted. We as staff look at to see if it meets all the requirements. We make a recommendation to our management, and our deputy director then certifies the device. We also, as an aside, it's almost an aside, we came up with a project-specific one. Project-specific would mean it's not a proprietary device. It's a one-time, unique kind of structure that's maybe being put in, but they would want to get certification for it. We haven't received an application with that, but we did come up with a application requirements for that. And then something that came up not at the very beginning and really wasn't part of the LA or San Francisco Bay Regional Board's permit process, we require that Mosquito Vector Control Association of California approve each of our devices. The issue with many of these devices, when installed, they interfere with vector control, what they need to do. Vector control needs to look inside, look to the bottom of a storm vault to see if there's standing water. If there is standing water, they need to look to see if there's larvae. And if there is larvae, then they need to put larvicide in to kill the mosquitoes. These storm vaults breed mosquitoes quite easily. It doesn't take much water at all. There could be just water in a corner of a storm vault, and that's enough to breed mosquitoes. So they need to. They can't have these devices interfere with their ability to look down quickly, because they have to look at hundreds a day. And if they do detect larvae, then they have to have a vertical way of applying the larvicide. So we have them look at all our applications. There's a few that came early on where we hadn't ironed out all the details with the Vector Control Association, but most of the applications have their approval. In many cases, they have to make some redesign the devices so that it didn't interfere with the vector control. Sorry about if you hear those dogs in the background. I can't do anything about that. But and in fact, just a little additional information. Many of the grandfathered of devices have not received vector control approval. So we are in the process very soon, this week or maybe next week, sending a letter to each of the manufacturers requiring them to submit an application that, even though they're certified, but we're asking them to meet all the application requirements, including getting vector control approval. And if any of them are not able to obtain vector control approval, they will be decertified. Our management does not want to cause a public health issue because of the installation of these full capture devices. Okay, so what we have is a lot of permits. All the trash provisions have to be implemented through these municipal stormwater permits. So, and there's lots of them. So even though the San Francisco Bay Regional Board generally, it's probably more stringent than what the trash provisions are, but the trash provisions don't exempt it from that. So they would have to update their permit and at least address in some ways how what they're already doing is equivalent to what the trash provisions required. Any TMDL is exempt. Any TMDL area is exempt, and the LA Regional Board permit that implements the TMDL, that is specifically exempt. However, there's other parts of Los Angeles that do not have TMDLs, and so they would have to update those relevant permits in that area to comply with the trash provisions. And there are 13 other regional board municipal stormwater permits that have to all be updated. There's statewide construction and industrial general permit has to be updated. The Caltrans, or Department of Transportation, however you refer to it, permit, that's being worked on by the state board here. That has to include trash provisions. And the statewide permit for the small municipalities will include it. Excuse me, it's expected that all these permits will be updated no later than next year, probably most of them this year, but next year. Okay, next slide. The permits will very similar to how the current Los Angeles and San Francisco Bay Regional Board permits will include requirements. And the trash provisions mandate that there be interim milestones in every permit. It gives an example of a production a year, but it's just an example. It could be done differently. It could be 10% area per year or 10% location per year. That's going to be, each regional board will go through their adoption process and determine that. There's going to be maintenance reporting. It's very important that the municipalities maintain full capture. Maintenance meeting, cleaning them out. If some screens, they get blinded, they get the sediment on them and they no longer function, they have to be cleaned. And we expect that it's sort of an educated guess because of how quickly a device will get filled with trash. Obviously, as it gets filled, it loses its ability to handle the peak flow from a 1 year, 1 hour storm event. So it's important that they be cleaned prior to it not functioning in accordance with the trash provisions. But it is sort of an educated guess of what that frequency would be in the beginning. So the permits will address that in somehow, a preliminary maintenance interval, but then based on evidence, when they go out and actually clean these things, if it looks like they have to increase the interval or maybe decrease the interval, it can work both ways, but it's important that these things get cleaned so they actually function. I've gone out on many inspections, and I've unfortunately have seen full capture devices functioning they were supposed to. Basically, if it rained, all the trash would just discharge because it wasn't maintained properly. So that's going to be addressed in the permits. It will require, of course, an update on how installation updates, if it's required 8% or 10% or 12% a year, what has actually been installed in order to meet those interim milestones. For track 2, there has to be this demonstration of full capture equivalency, so that they're going to have to be able to show through the trash assessment or whatever, okay, we've done the street sweeping, we've done some other things, but there's no trash on the street. And that's equivalent to if we put a full capture device in. That's a lot of that is left to be determined over the years as far as how that's going to work. I'm sure a lot of smart people are going to figure out a way, maybe the California Stormwater Quarterly come up with some BMPs on how to do that. But that's the negative part of track 2, is that it creates, it's not an absolute where you're assumed to be in compliance if you just put a full capture device in. Regardless of what track, the trash provisions have an absolute date to comply. And that's, it says 10 years of after the first permit is adopted, but no later than December 2nd, 2030. Well, obviously, we're already within 10 years of December 2nd, 2030. So all these permits that will be adopted this year or next year won't have 10 years. They'll have an absolute December 2nd, 2030. That's when 100% compliance is required. The implementation successes, well, in the case of those 2 TMDLs for Los Angeles River and Bologna Creek and Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board, there's an actual capture of 6 million pounds of trash per year through the 17,000 installed full capture devices. In Bologna Creek, there's an actual capture of 1 million pounds of trash per year via the 2,500 full capture devices. For San Francisco Bay Regional Board, they basically, how they reported it is that there's a 90% permittee of those 70 municipalities. 90% of them are in full compliance with the 2020 goal of 80% trash reduction. The ones that aren't in compliance have to do a plan to catch up. There's lessons learned, and that in getting 100% trash reduction, and maybe this isn't a surprise, it's going to be a financial challenge for some municipalities. There's a lot of these municipalities would like to have offsets for doing cleanups in creeks and rivers or homeless encampments to try to minimize or offset at least the cost of trying to comply with these trash provisions. We've learned that maintenance, operation and maintenance, hasn't always been done correctly. Just leave it like that. Leave it as that. We need there has to be more attention to it than there has been. Because like I said before, I've seen in too many cases these devices put in and not actually maintained properly. They are in sometimes harsh conditions. They can break. The screens can bend or twist. There are things that can happen to them. There's also cases where some have been vandalized. It's hard to imagine. I wouldn't go down into one of those, but some I've seen vandalized ones. So the less it's kept up with, they can become ineffective in trapping trash. We found out through this mapping process that there's, and this is something that the municipalities are going to have to deal with, is that not all priority land uses discharge. Their water doesn't discharge out into a gutter that goes into a storm vault where there's going to be a full capture device. Often in like a parking lot at a grocery store, there'll be all these smaller little inlets in the parking lot, and those when the shopping center was built, those connected directly underground into a main trunk line. So it bypasses the storm vault. There's no way of getting the trapping the trash because it's going directly into the trunk line. So there's a case where the choices are either mandate that these commercial operators, they put do their own trash reduction, or the municipality downstream somewhere has to put in some large stormwater treatment system or trash treatment system to try to get the trash out of their storm drain system. We also and again, this probably isn't a surprise, but there's evidence. I mean, not all the infrastructure of these cities, especially you have some older cities, it's not easy. Now, these devices they're not universal where they fit everywhere. There are some places that are problematic. They may have to actually dig up part of their storm drain system and replace it, which is, of course, very expensive to do. So that's a good reason for having Track 2, because this Track 2, it helps with that if there's an area you just can't do it, or it's just inefficient to deal with that area with a full capture device, there's ways of working around it to still capture trash maybe at other locations that would be the same. We're finding out that, again, this isn't difficult to understand, that the direct dumping and the burgeoning homeless encampments are significant sources of trash. And I went on an inspection in Santa Rosa, and it was easily the amount of trash from the homeless encampments far exceeds what the population of the city of Santa Rosa may litter there. It's just so it's over, and that happens in many places. And so the and we found the last thing here is that many of the full capture devices have to be redesigned to assure adequate vector control accessibility. They are. Many of our applications when they first came in had to be redesigned, and many of these grandfather devices will also need to be redesigned. I'm just bringing this up again because this we call them hot spots, but cleanups of shorelines and creeks and homeless, that's a big issue. It's the trash provisions. One of the things that it is not understood is that the trash provisions specifically exclude homeless encampments, and it basically it's a program that focuses on priority land uses that within a municipality. Most of the creeks and shorelines and homeless encampments are not do not discharge into a municipality. They're actually in the waterway. And the waterway is not part of a municipality storm drain system. The water board during the trash provision adoption process was specifically asked by many to include something, some type of credit system for these type of things for homeless encampment cleanup, and when the water board's response was, that's not we want to have a statewide program that focuses on these priority land uses, and that the issue of homeless encampments is beyond the reach of a single agency to deal with. And so it doesn't mean they can change their policy, by the way, but that's how these trash provisions were adopted. And it doesn't mean that some partial credits maybe can, like the San Francisco Bay Regional Board has done, but very partial can be done. But they are looking at the Caltrans is trying to coordinate homeless encampment cleanup on their right of way with local agencies. The Central Valley Regional Board, that's one here in Sacramento, is considering some type of hotspot cleanup credit in their permit. And the San Francisco Bay this is what we know of. I don't know about all these permits, but they're looking at adding some credit. But it's a difficult issue because of how the trash provisions were adopted, and what is considered regulated. So a recap is that the trash provisions indicate that they want no discharge of trash to surface waters or deposition of trash where it may be discharged to surface waters. But we know from what I've told you that no discharge has a limited definition. It sounds good, but it doesn't mean no discharge. It's just no discharge of trash 5 millimeters or greater from a 1 year, 1 hour storm from priority land use areas. One thing I forgot to mention earlier, and I'm not sure that I can say there's a typical city, but most cities, the area that would be considered priority land uses is maybe 20 or 25% of the surface area. I live in a city called Folsom, California. In my city, it's mostly single family residences. The lots are quarter acre or so. And so the great majority of the city is not subject to, it's not regulated by the trash provisions. Fortunately, it's not a real messy city either, so that's good. But a lot of people think it's the whole city is being regulated, and it's not. It's limited. It's not being done the way the Los Angeles Regional Board did it for their TMDLs, or the San Francisco Bay Regional Board did it for their permit. But full compliance is required 10 years after the first permit, or no later than December 2nd, 2030. Let's see, what did I, let me think of what I meant to, I put this in toward the end. Okay, so the permittees must show compliance by the deadline through installing, operating, maintaining full capture systems that trap all particle 5 millimeters or greater that meet the design peak flow, or installing, operating, and maintaining any combination of full capture systems, multi-benefit projects, or other treatment controls or institutional controls that achieve full capture equivalence. There is another, isn't that really necessarily trash per se, but the legislature passed back in 2008. There was a concern about these things called pre-production plastics. A funny way of referring to them is nurdles, if anyone knows about that. But basically, because of the problem, they're washing up primarily in Southern California beaches. There was an effort to try to figure out where these sources were coming from. But the water code section that the legislation enacted was that any industrial facility, any facility under the industrial stormwater permit that has these nurdles, there was a very specific set of best management practice that are mandatory that they have to use to prevent the dispersion of these pre-production plastics from those facilities. But it only covers it only covers those that are under the industrial stormwater permit. What was found by two other staff in the industrial unit back in 2010 and 2011, that many of the introduction of a lot of this pre-production plastics came at railroad sidings, where rail cars were offloaded. And you can imagine, tons of this stuff being offloaded, and those areas aren't covered by the industrial general permit. So there's still a big hole of regulation there, as far as it's good that we cover the ones that are under the industrial permit, but there's plenty of facilities that aren't subject to the industrial stormwater permit that also handle these things, and if incorrectly handled, obviously they'll get out into the environment. So that concludes my presentation. Probably, I think I'm remembering, I missed a few things here and there, but maybe there's plenty of time for questions.
Hey guys, this is Charles. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. Yeah, I was interested towards the beginning of your presentation. You were laying out the track selection, track 1 and track 2. And you briefly mentioned the equivalent alternative land uses. And I just wanted to mention that was something that we were looking at. I'm down in San Diego here. We were looking at using that. And I haven't gotten a lot of guidance on it. It seems like it's set up to be pretty open to the executive regional board members. But I was just wondering if you generally knew, if you do that, if all you were doing is installing certified full capture devices, but maybe swapping out treatment of PLU areas for other types of land uses, would that be a track 1 compliance pathway, assuming you get the necessary approval from the local regional board?
Well, I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this. Under track 1, you can remain under track 1 by selecting other locations that you put a full capture device in, period. Okay, so if you're proposing to do anything other than putting in full capture devices, you're in track 2. But the benefit of that, there is actually a benefit to that. You don't have to ask for permission. It's up to you to choose the areas that you want to do that generate substantial trash, and it's up to you on how what combination of controls you want to implement. So that's one benefit that people often overlook under track 2, even though there's the negative part about then having to prove it later on. But
right, exactly. I mean, I still am uncertain. I guess it depends on
what you said is you wanted to.
I'm really trying to stay in track 1 if possible, so I don't have to prove it.
Well, it has to be 100% full capture devices. There's not anything the regional board can do about that. You're really limited.
So the scenario I'm looking at is 100% full capture devices, but putting those full capture devices in PLU land uses where I can, and for PLU locations where I can't due to infrastructure setups or simply because they're expensive, putting the full capture devices in non-PLU areas and demonstrating overall that I'm capturing the same load. So it sort of like gets into the loading that is discussed in track 2, but since it's only full capture devices, it seems like track 1 to me, but I haven't heard definitively from anybody.
Well, where you locate a full capture device doesn't really come into play as long as that full capture device is located in a place that it's capturing the water from the PLU. So if I've had over the years, people wonder, well, can I capture it, downstream? In LA, for instance, they put these very large full capture devices that capture a square mile of discharge. They don't put their full capture devices at the PLU. They put it downstream into, goes into a main trunk line, and then it goes into. So where you actually treat it doesn't matter, but it has to be the water from the PLU that's being treated. And so you can always give me a call if you want to. We don't want to get this gets into the weeds a little bit because it's very project specific, and we can talk about it. You can call me, but the location of it doesn't matter as long as it's capturing that water from that PLU. But as soon as you're saying, okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't want to drag in the weeds either, but yeah, if you're the person I can talk to, I'll follow up with you later. Thank you very much.
Okay. The certified full capture device list, that gets updated almost every month because we get applications constantly. Well, that's going to be in a permit. And so you can say for any future permits, that has to be adopted within the permit process. And I'm sure there'll be comments about how to do it and what's the preferable way of doing it and so on. But the experience has been they required generally the 2 other permits that have been successfully implementing trash control, the LA and San Francisco Bay Regional Board permits. They had 10% reduction of trash per year. Yes, when you go to our website and see those are on there, and they have to be. There's a lot of narrative there right up about how they have to be sized appropriately to continue to capture the peak flow from a 1 year, 1 hour storm. But those are proven to be effective, and they're multi-benefit because they do infiltrate water into the groundwater, which is another water board priority. Well, without reiterating my presentation, but toward the end, I did indicate that 100% doesn't really mean 100% in the way a layman would think 100%. I mean, 100% would mean we all could go home and not worry about trash cleanups anymore. That's not going to happen. 100% means 100% of what the municipality can do for its regulated area. And its regulated area area is confined to either the priority land uses or equivalent to priority land uses. And it has limitations as far as it's not for an infinite storm. It's for a 1 year, 1 hour storm is pretty, it's very rare where we have something that exceeds that. But if you have something that exceeds that, that probably will flush all the trash down the storm drain system. But they had to size it in a way that we didn't cause flooding or things like that. We obviously aren't catching trash that's less than 5 millimeter. You can get crushed styrofoam particles that would be smaller than 5 millimeters, and so they'll still get out. But the concern, if you make the screens too small, they would instantly clog, and then the full capture device would not be effective any longer. So there had to be trade-offs there to define what 100% means. Well, I think maybe the easiest way of addressing it is you could substitute 100% of our trash program just by doing homeless encampment cleanups and then have no trash program. That's not what the intent of the regional board, the San Francisco Bay Regional Board was, or the State Water Board in developing these trash provisions. They wanted to protect the ability to have a program and not have a homeless is a separate thing, and there may or may not be a separate effort by the state board to more properly address the homeless situation. A lot of it is simply how the regulations currently are. We can only regulate the municipalities. We can't and the regulation and the EPA regulations are clear that we can only regulate what they have control over. It's what their storm drain system, what enters their storm drain system. If it doesn't enter their stormwater system, well, then there's nothing, the way the current regulations are set up, that we can do, unless some other regulations are adopted either by EPA or in the state. So it's probably above my pay grade to be able to speculate what that is, but that's why we have hearings, and there's ways of getting information to the state board or the regional boards to address that as best as they legally can through the permits. Yeah, there's nothing other than that. If a pre-production plastic pellet is greater than 5 millimeters, it's going to get caught. If it's smaller, a portion of it could get through these screens that are there. But other than that, there's no separate, that I know of, effort to do any more with pre-production plastics.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, Leo. This is Angina from Los Angeles Water Board. As many of you know, we are drafting our regional MS4 permit, and we received a lot of comments on the statewide trash provision section that we included in our tentative draft. One of the comments mentioned that the link, because in the draft of our permit, we reference to the state board's website that includes a PDF of the most recent full capture system device list that have been certified. So we reference the PDF link for reference. So we got a comment that the link was recently revised, and as a matter of fact, I revised the link and I included the December PDF update. But as you just mentioned, this PDF gets updated almost every month. So what's your recommendation? Should I include this reference link to the statewide, the implementation website, the trash implementation program website? and have people navigate through there, or what's a better option to reference?
I would just give them the link to the trash page that we have here displayed, because that's where they can find it. And this way you don't have to worry about it. I don't know if I misspoke, or I thought what I said was the certified list of full capture devices gets updated all the time. I didn't think I said that the application doesn't get updated that often. That's
what I meant. The list, the full capture list.
Yeah,
not
I
the
would
application.
just that list gets updated as we certify new applications or get new vector control approval. So the workaround is don't give them the specific link, which will change. Give them the link to the trash control page will not change. And there's only 6 bullets or 5 bullets that we have on there. And so I think they can easily find that themselves when they get to the page if you tell them that that's where it's at.
Right. That's what I was thinking, because I just learned from you saying that this PDF gets updated so often. So the best way is to link the page. Thank you, Leah. I will approach you for visual trash assessment and other trash load, baseline trash load calculation or approaches offline. Thank you.